When people imagine the Victorian era, they often picture grand mansions, elegant dresses, and strict social rules. Yet behind many of those polished images stood a group of women whose lives were shaped by loss, resilience, and determination. Victorian widows occupied a unique place in 19th century society. Some inherited wealth and gained freedoms that married women could only dream about, while others struggled to survive in a world that offered few opportunities for women on their own. Their stories reveal a fascinating side of Victorian life that is often overlooked. In the early years of Queen Victoria's reign, a woman's identity was closely tied to her husband. Marriage was considered both a social duty and an economic necessity. Once married, a woman had limited legal control over property and finances. However, when a husband died, everything could change. A widow often gained legal authority that she had never possessed before. She could manage household affairs, oversee business interests, and make important decisions independently. For some women, widowhood brought an unexpected sense of freedom. Society expected widows to enter a period of mourning that could last for years. Black clothing became the visible symbol of loss. Wealthier widows followed detailed mourning customs, wearing special fabrics and avoiding social events. Entire industries developed to supply mourning dresses, jewelry, and accessories. Shops advertised products specifically designed for grieving women, turning personal sorrow into a thriving business. Yet mourning was not simply about fashion. Public displays of grief reflected Victorian values that emphasized respectability, family loyalty, and emotional restraint. The experience of widowhood varied greatly depending on class. A wealthy widow might inherit a comfortable income and maintain her household with servants. A working-class widow faced a much harsher reality. Without a husband's wages, many women had to find employment quickly to support themselves and their children. Some took in laundry, worked as seamstresses, or opened small businesses from their homes. Others relied on relatives, charities, or local churches for assistance. Despite these challenges, many widows demonstrated remarkable resourcefulness. They became shopkeepers, property managers, and entrepreneurs in a society that often underestimated women's abilities. Their success quietly challenged assumptions about gender and independence. Victorian widows lived between two worlds. They carried the weight of social expectations while navigating new responsibilities and opportunities. Their lives remind us that the Victorian era was not only shaped by kings, queens, and industrialists, but also by ordinary women who adapted to extraordinary circumstances. Behind every black mourning veil was a personal story of survival, courage, and change.
For many Victorian widows, the death of a husband was not only an emotional loss, but also a financial turning point. The moment a funeral ended and relatives returned home, practical concerns began to dominate daily life. Bills had to be paid, children had to be fed, and difficult decisions about the future could no longer be postponed. In an age before modern social safety nets, survival often depended on a widow's ability to adapt quickly. Wealthy families usually prepared for such situations through inheritance, arrangements, investments, or life insurance policies. These resources could provide a widow with enough income to maintain her household and preserve her social standing. Yet, even among the upper classes, financial security was not guaranteed. Poor investments, debts, or legal disputes could quickly reduce a family's fortune. Some widows discovered that their husbands had left behind far less money than expected. For middle-class and working-class women, the challenges were often far greater. Victorian society offered limited employment opportunities. For respectable women, many widows turned their homes into workplaces, A spare room might become a small sewing shop. A kitchen could serve as the center of a baking business. Some women took in boarders, renting out rooms to travelers, laborers, or clerks seeking affordable accommodation. These small enterprises allowed widows to earn income while remaining within the boundaries of social expectations. Education also played an important role. Widows with literacy and bookkeeping skills often had a better chance of managing family, finances, or continuing a husband's business. In some cases, women surprised customers and competitors alike by successfully operating shops, warehouses, and even manufacturing firms. While Victorian culture often portrayed women as dependent on male guidance, reality frequently told a different story. Newspapers occasionally reported on widows who became respected business owners and community leaders. Children were often at the center of a widow's concerns. Mothers worked tirelessly to secure education and opportunities for their sons and daughters. Older children frequently contributed to family income, helping support younger siblings. These family efforts created strong bonds and a sense of shared responsibility. Despite hardships, many Victorian widows earned admiration for their determination and discipline. They navigated a society filled with restrictions while finding creative ways to provide stability and hope. Their experiences reveal an important truth about the Victorian era. Behind the formal rules and rigid social structures stood countless women whose perseverance helped families survive and prosper during times of uncertainty. Their quiet achievements became an essential part of everyday Victorian life.
Although widowhood was often associated with sorrow and hardship, it could also bring a surprising degree of independence. During much of the Victorian era, married women lived under legal and social restrictions that limited their control over property, earnings, and major decisions. A husband was generally expected to manage the family's finances and represent the household in public affairs. Yet when a woman became a widow, many of those limitations suddenly disappeared. For the first time in years, and sometimes for the first time in her life, she could make important choices without seeking permission from anyone else. This new independence transformed the lives of countless Victorian women. Some widows took charge of family businesses that had once belonged to their husbands. Others managed farms, supervised investments, or handled rental properties. While society often assumed that women lacked business skills, many widows proved remarkably capable. Customers, tenants, and employees quickly learned that these women were more than capable of overseeing complex operations. In some communities, successful widows became respected figures, whose advice was sought by neighbors and local merchants alike. Independence also extended into social life. Married women were expected to follow strict conventions regarding behavior, travel, and public appearances. Widows often enjoyed greater flexibility. They could visit relatives, move to a different town, or arrange their daily schedules with fewer restrictions. Some pursued educational interests, joined charitable organizations, or became active in community projects. Victorian society still imposed expectations on widows, but it also granted them a level of personal authority that married women rarely experienced. This freedom sometimes created unexpected tensions. Younger widows were often encouraged to remarry, especially if they had children. Family members and friends frequently believed that a second marriage would provide stability and protection. Yet not every widow welcomed the idea. Having gained control over her own affairs, a woman might hesitate to surrender that independence by entering another marriage. Historical records reveal many widows who chose to remain single, valuing autonomy over social expectations. Their decisions challenged traditional assumptions about women's roles and demonstrated that personal fulfillment could take many forms. By the late Victorian period, changing laws and social attitudes gradually expanded opportunities for women in general. Widows played an important role in this transformation. Through their daily actions, they showed that women could successfully manage finances, lead businesses, and make responsible decisions. Their lives became living examples of female capability in an era often remembered for its strict gender rules.
One of the most recognizable features of Victorian widowhood was the elaborate system of mourning, customs that governed nearly every aspect of a woman's public life. To modern observers, these traditions may seem unusually strict, but for Victorians, they represented respect, dignity, and devotion to family. The death of a husband placed a widow into a carefully defined social role, and society expected her to follow its rules with great seriousness. The most visible symbol of mourning was clothing. Widows were expected to wear black garments made from simple, non-reflective fabrics. Jewelry was often limited to pieces containing dark materials such as jet, a black gemstone that became enormously popular during the Victorian era. Bright colors, decorative patterns, and luxurious accessories were considered inappropriate during the earliest stages of mourning. A widow's appearance instantly communicated her status to everyone she encountered. The length of mourning varied according to personal circumstances and social class, but many widows observed a formal mourning period lasting 2 years or longer. During the first stage, known as deep mourning, social activities were greatly reduced. Attendance at parties, dances, and celebrations was discouraged. Some women avoided theaters, concerts, and other public entertainments. As time passed, their restrictions gradually eased. Special shades of gray, lavender, and mauve eventually replaced solid black, signaling a transition back into ordinary social life. Yet these customs were not followed equally by everyone. Wealthy widows could afford wardrobes specifically designed for each stage of mourning. Fashion houses and department stores offered extensive collections of mourning attire, allowing affluent women to observe every detail of tradition. Working-class widows faced a different reality. Purchasing multiple sets of clothing was often impossible. Many wore a single black dress for years because it served both practical and symbolic purposes. Economic necessity frequently shaped how mourning customs were observed. Queen Victoria herself had a profound influence on these practices. After the death of her husband, Prince Albert, in 1861, she remained in mourning for the rest of her life. Her devotion captured public attention and reinforced the importance of mourning. Throughout British society, newspapers, magazines, and etiquette guides discussed proper behavior, helping spread these customs across the English-speaking world. For many widows, however, mourning was more than a social obligation. It provided a structured way to cope with loss during a period when emotional expression was carefully regulated. The black dresses, quiet routines, and gradual return to normal life offered a sense of order in difficult times. Through these traditions, Victorian widows balanced personal grief with the expectations of a society that valued ceremonial, respectability, and self-control above almost everything else.
For Victorian widows who had children, everyday life revolved around a single goal that outweighed nearly everything else. They had to secure a future for the next generation. In an era when financial security could disappear overnight, raising children alone required extraordinary determination. A widow was expected to be both mother and father, providing emotional support, while also managing the practical responsibilities that had once been shared. The challenge was especially difficult because Victorian society placed enormous importance on family reputation, education, and social standing. Every decision a widow made could affect her children's future opportunities. Education was often viewed as the pathway to a better life. Even widows with limited means sacrificed personal comforts to keep their children in school for as long as possible. Mothers carefully balanced household budgets, searching for ways to pay school fees, purchase books, or provide suitable clothing. They understood that literacy and education could open doors that poverty might otherwise keep closed. For boys, education offered access to skilled professions, business, careers, or government service. For girls, it increased the chances of securing respectable employment or making a favorable marriage. The home itself became a place of discipline and preparation. Victorian culture valued hard work, self-control, and moral character. Widowed mothers often embraced these values with particular intensity. They taught children the importance of honesty, responsibility, and perseverance. Many believed that strong character would help their sons and daughters overcome obstacles that wealth alone could not solve. Family routines were carefully organized, with children expected to contribute according to their age and abilities. Older siblings frequently helped care for younger ones, creating a sense of cooperation that strengthened family bonds. In working-class households, children sometimes entered the workforce at an early age. Sons might find jobs in workshops, factories, or shops, while daughters assisted with domestic work or sewing. Although these contributions helped support the family, many mothers worried about the sacrifices their children were forced to make. They dreamed of opportunities that would spare the next generation from the hardships they themselves had endured. Despite the difficulties, countless Victorian widows succeeded in raising capable and ambitious children. Some sons became doctors, lawyers, teachers, and businessmen. Some daughters became educators, writers, nurses, and reformers. Their achievements reflected years of quiet effort made by mothers who often received little recognition. Behind many successful Victorians stood widows who had devoted themselves to creating stability in uncertain times. Their influence extended far beyond the walls of their homes, shaping the future of families, communities, and even the rapidly changing society around them. Not all Victorian widows lived in cities surrounded by shops, factories, and busy streets. Many spent their lives in small villages, rural communities, and farming districts where daily existence depended on the land. For these women, widowhood brought a unique set of responsibilities. The loss of a husband often meant that a widow suddenly became responsible for managing livestock, overseeing crops, negotiating with suppliers, and ensuring that the family property remained productive. While Victorian society often imagined farming as men's work, reality frequently required women to take on leadership roles when circumstances demanded it. Rural widows faced challenges that differed from those encountered in towns. A failed harvest, harsh weather, or disease among animals could threaten an entire family's livelihood. Every season carried risks. Widows learned to make practical decisions about planting schedules, equipment repairs, and household expenses. Many relied on the help of relatives, neighbors, and older children. But the responsibility for the family's future often rested squarely on their shoulders. In close-knit rural communities, reputation mattered enormously. A widow who demonstrated competence and reliability could earn the respect of fellow farmers and local merchants. Neighbors frequently exchanged labor and resources during difficult times, creating networks of support that helped families survive. At the same time, rural life offered little privacy. Personal struggles were often visible to the entire community, and widows lived under constant observation from those around them. Beyond farming, Many rural widows supplemented their income through additional work. Some produced butter, cheese, or preserves for local markets. Others raised poultry, sold handmade goods, or provided services such as sewing and laundering. These activities generated valuable income and allowed women to maintain a degree of financial independence. Their ability to combine domestic responsibilities with business activities demonstrated remarkable adaptability. The countryside also shaped the lives of widows in more personal ways. Unlike crowded cities, rural areas followed the rhythms of nature. The passing seasons influenced every aspect of life, from planting and harvesting to community gatherings and local celebrations. Widows often found comfort in familiar routines and strong connections to the land their families had worked for generations. The fields, gardens, and farms around them served as reminders of both the past and the future. Through persistence and hard work, countless rural widows preserved family farms and protected their children's inheritance. Their efforts helped sustain agricultural communities that formed the backbone of Victorian society. Though their stories rarely appeared in newspapers or history books, these women played an essential role in feeding the nation and maintaining the traditions that defined life beyond the growing industrial cities. As the Victorian era progressed, widows became increasingly involved in charitable work and community leadership. What began as a practical necessity often evolved into a meaningful public role. Having experienced hardship, responsibility, and social change firsthand, many widows possessed valuable knowledge that could benefit others. Their unique position within society allowed them to move between different social circles, making them important figures in local communities. During the 19th century, charitable organizations expanded rapidly across Britain and the United States. Industrialization had brought economic growth, but it had also created overcrowded cities, poverty, and difficult working conditions. Many people believed that local action could help address these problems. Widows frequently became active participants in these efforts. Some volunteered at schools, hospitals, and orphanages. Others organized fundraising events, distributed food and clothing, or visited families facing hardship. Their work often provided assistance to those who had few other sources of support. Respectability played an important role in Victorian society, and widows were often viewed as trustworthy and responsible individuals because they had already fulfilled expected family duties through marriage and motherhood. They could sometimes participate in public activities with greater acceptance than younger unmarried women. This gave them opportunities to influence local affairs in ways that might otherwise have been difficult. In many towns, widows served on charitable committees, managed community projects, and helped coordinate relief efforts during periods of economic difficulty. Education was another area where widows made a lasting impact. Some established reading groups, supported libraries, or helped fund schools for children from disadvantaged families. Others worked directly as teachers or administrators. They understood that knowledge could improve lives and open opportunities for future generations. Their efforts contributed to the gradual expansion of educational access during the Victorian period. Religious institutions also benefited from the involvement of widows. Churches often relied on dedicated volunteers to organize events, support vulnerable families, and maintain community connections. Widows became central figures in many congregations, offering both practical assistance and personal guidance. Their presence helped strengthen social networks that connected neighborhoods and villages together. Through these activities, Victorian widows demonstrated that influence did not always require wealth, political power, or public fame. Their contributions were often quiet and rarely attracted national attention. Yet they improved countless lives. They transformed personal experience into public service and used their skills to strengthen the communities around them. By the end of the Victorian era, many widows had become respected leaders whose efforts helped shape local society. Their legacy reminds us that meaningful change is often achieved not by famous figures, but by ordinary people who choose to help others during times of need. For many Victorian widows, one of the most difficult questions was whether to marry again. Society often viewed remarriage as a sensible and practical solution. A new husband could provide financial security, social stability, and assistance in raising children. Family members frequently encouraged widows to consider a second marriage, especially if they were still relatively young. Yet the decision was rarely simple. Behind every remarriage stood a complex mixture of personal feelings, social expectations, and practical concerns. Victorian culture placed great importance on marriage as the foundation of society. Widows who remained single were respected in many situations, but remarriage was often presented as the natural next step. Newspapers, novels, and advice books regularly discuss the subject. Some people believe that a household functioned best when both the husband and wife were present. Others worried that widows living independently might face unnecessary hardships. These attitudes created subtle pressure that many women could not ignore. At the same time, widowhood had often given women a level of independence they had never previously enjoyed. After years of managing finances, making decisions, and directing their own households, some widows were reluctant to surrender that freedom. They had proven their ability to support families, run businesses, and navigate society on their own terms. A second marriage could bring companionship and security, but it might also mean returning to a more restricted role. As a result, many widows carefully weighed the benefits and disadvantages. Before making any decision, children frequently influenced the outcome. A widow had to consider how a new marriage might affect family relationships. Some children welcomed the prospect of additional support and stability. Others feared change or remained deeply attached to the memory of their late father. Widows often placed their children's well-being above their own personal desires, making decisions they believed would create the best future for the family as a whole. Economic circumstances also played a major role. Wealthier widows who possessed independent incomes were generally under less pressure to remarry. Working-class widows, facing financial hardship, often confronted more urgent realities. For them, remarriage could represent not only companionship, but also economic survival. Every situation was different, and there was no single path that suited everyone. By the end of the Victorian era, attitudes toward women's independence were slowly changing. Increasing numbers of widows chose to remain single and continue managing their own affairs. Others entered successful second marriages built on mutual respect and shared responsibilities. Their experiences reflected a society in transition, where traditional expectations were beginning to coexist with new ideas about female autonomy. The choices these women made revealed both the opportunities and limitations of life during one of history's most fascinating periods. While many Victorian widows spent their lives focused on family and local communities, some found themselves connected to the rapidly changing world of business and industry. The 19th century was an age of transformation. Railroads expanded across countries, factories multiplied, cities grew at remarkable speed, and new technologies changed the way people lived and worked. When a husband who owned a business died, his widow often faced a difficult choice. She could sell the enterprise, place it under someone else's control, or attempt to manage it herself. Surprisingly, many chose the third option. Despite widespread assumptions about women's abilities, Victorian widows often proved to be capable and effective business leaders. In family-owned shops, widows regularly stepped into management roles. They supervised employees, negotiated with suppliers, balanced accounts, and maintained relationships with customers. In some cases, these businesses had existed for generations, and preserving them became a matter of family pride as well as financial necessity. Widows who succeeded earned respect within their communities and demonstrated that practical knowledge could be just as important as formal training. Larger enterprises presented even greater challenges. Some widows inherited manufacturing firms, shipping companies, or substantial commercial properties, while professional managers often assisted with daily operations. Many women remained actively involved in major decisions. They reviewed financial reports, approved investments, and monitored business performance. Historical records reveal numerous examples of widows who protected family fortunes through careful management and sound judgment. The expansion of railroads created new opportunities and risks, improved transportation, connected distant markets, and allowed businesses to grow beyond local communities. Widows who owned agricultural land, warehouses, or commercial buildings often benefited from these developments. Property values increased in areas served by new transportation routes, creating wealth that could support families for generations. At the same time, economic downturns and market fluctuations required constant vigilance. Success was never guaranteed. Newspapers occasionally featured stories about widows who had transformed struggling businesses into prosperous enterprises. These accounts fascinated readers because they challenged traditional ideas about women's roles. While society continued to emphasize domestic responsibilities, reality showed that many women possessed the intelligence and determination needed to succeed in commerce. Their achievements quietly expanded public perceptions of what women could accomplish. By the final decades of the Victorian era, the presence of women in business was becoming more visible. Widows played an important part in this change. Through necessity, they entered fields that had long been dominated by men. Through competence, they earned recognition and respect. Their experiences reflected the broader transformation of Victorian society, where old traditions increasingly coexisted with new opportunities. Behind many successful businesses stood widows, whose leadership helped shape the economic growth of the 19th century. As Victorian society entered its final decades, the lives of widows became closely connected to a broader movement for women's rights and social reform. Although many widows never considered themselves activists, their experiences often highlighted the inequalities that women faced under existing laws. Having managed households, raised children, supervised businesses, and controlled property, widows understood from personal experience that women were capable of far more than society traditionally acknowledged. Their daily lives quietly challenged long-standing assumptions about gender and authority. Throughout much of the 19th century, legal restrictions limited the rights of married women. Property ownership, financial control, and legal independence were often transferred to husbands after marriage. Widows, however, occupied a different position because they frequently managed estates and finances themselves. They provided visible examples of female competence. Reformers pointed to these examples when arguing that women deserved greater legal protections and opportunities. If a widow could successfully oversee a business or manage investments, why should other women be denied similar rights? Debates about education also gained momentum during this period. Increasing numbers of people believed that women should have access to better schools and professional training. Widows often supported these efforts because they had first-hand knowledge of how valuable education could be. Those who possessed literacy, accounting skills, or business experience were generally better equipped to navigate the Challenges of widow. Many hoped that future generations of women would enjoy opportunities that had not been available to them. Charitable organizations and reform movements provided additional avenues for involvement. Widows participated in campaigns related to public health, education, housing conditions, and poverty relief. Their work brought them into contact with community leaders, politicians, and social reformers. Through these connections, many gained a greater awareness of the social issues affecting Victorian society. While some remained focused on local concerns, others became supporters of broader reforms that aimed to improve conditions for women and families across the nation. Newspapers and magazines increasingly featured stories about accomplished women, including successful widows. Public attitudes began to shift, albeit slowly. The image of women as entirely dependent on male protection no longer matched reality. Every widow who managed property, led a business, or directed a charitable organization provided evidence that women could contribute meaningfully to public life. By the time Queen Victoria's long reign came to an end in 1901, society had changed significantly. Many challenges remained, and full equality was still far in the future. Yet Victorian widows had helped lay important foundations for progress. Through resilience, competence, and determination, they demonstrated that women could succeed in roles far beyond those traditionally assigned to them. Their influence extended beyond their own generation, helping shape the social changes that would continue into the 20th century. While public discussions often focused on wealthy widows, the vast majority of Victorian widows belonged to the working class. Their stories were rarely recorded in detail, yet they represented millions of women whose labor and determination helped sustain families through some of the most challenging circumstances of the 19th century. These widows lived far from grand estates and elegant drawing rooms. Instead, they occupied modest homes in crowded cities, industrial neighborhoods, and small towns where survival depended on constant effort and careful planning. The death of a husband could create an immediate financial crisis. In many working-class families, a man's wages provided the primary source of income. Without that support, a widow had little time to grieve before practical concerns demanded attention. Rent had to be paid, food had to be purchased, and children required care. Every day brought new responsibilities. Many widows entered the workforce almost immediately, accepting whatever opportunities were available. Employment options were often limited. Some women worked as seamstresses, producing clothing for factories, shops, or private customers. Others found work as laundry, spending long hours washing and ironing garments for wealthier households. Domestic service remained another common occupation. Some widows cleaned homes, prepared meals, or cared for children in exchange for wages. These jobs were physically demanding and often poorly paid, yet they provided essential income that kept families together. Home-based work became especially important. A widow could sew, mend clothing, prepare food, or take in laundry while remaining close to her children. Small businesses frequently operated from a single room. Every available space might be used to generate income. The kitchen became a workshop. The dining table became a sewing station. The family home itself became a center of economic activity. Community support also played a vital role. Neighbors often shared resources, exchanged services, and provided assistance during difficult periods. Churches, charitable organizations, and mutual aid societies offered help when families faced extreme hardship. Although these resources were limited, they often made the difference between stability and crisis. Working-class widows developed strong networks built on cooperation and shared experience. Despite countless obstacles, many succeeded in raising families and creating opportunities for their children. Their lives demanded resilience, discipline, and sacrifice. Every small achievement represented hours of labor and careful decision-making. While history books often celebrate politicians and famous reformers, the everyday efforts of working-class widows were equally important. They kept households functioning, supported local economies, and helped shape the communities that powered Victorian society. For Victorian widows, aging brought a new set of challenges and uncertainties. The strength and energy that had carried them through years of hard work gradually faded, while concerns about security and comfort became increasingly important. Many women who had spent decades raising children, managing households, or operating small businesses now faced questions about who would care for them in their later years. The answer often depended on family relationships, financial circumstances, and the social networks they had built throughout their lives. For those with supportive children, old age could bring a sense of stability. Sons and daughters, who had benefited from their mother's sacrifices, frequently provided housing, financial assistance, and companionship. Multi-generational households were common during the Victorian era, and elderly widows often lived with adult children and grandchildren. These arrangements allowed families to share responsibilities while preserving close personal connections. Grandmothers frequently played important roles within the household, helping with child care, offering advice, and passing family traditions to younger generations. Not every widow enjoyed such security. Some had lost children to illness, while others had family members who lived far away in growing cities or overseas colonies. For these women, old age could be a lonely experience. Charitable institutions and religious organizations attempted to provide assistance, but resources were often limited. Many elderly widows continued working far longer than they would have preferred simply because they had no other source of income. Even modest earnings from sewing, mending clothes, or taking in lodgers could make the difference between independence and poverty. Retirement, as modern society understands it, was uncommon for working-class Victorians. Most people continued contributing to family or community life for as long as their health allowed. Widows who had spent years managing practical affairs often remained active and engaged despite advancing age. Their experience made them respected sources of wisdom within their neighborhoods. Younger women sometimes sought advice from older widows regarding marriage, finances, children, and household management. These conversations helped preserve knowledge that was passed from one generation to the next. Advances in medicine during the late Victorian period gradually improved life expectancy. Though many health challenges remained, elderly widows faced risks from illness, limited health care, and economic hardship. Yet many demonstrated the same resilience that had defined their earlier years. They adapted to changing circumstances and continued contributing to family life whenever possible. By the end of their lives, these women had witnessed extraordinary transformations. They had seen the rise of railroads, factories, telegraphs, modern cities, and expanding educational opportunities. Their personal stories reflected the broader history of the Victorian age itself. Through decades of change, hardship, and progress, elderly widows remained living links between generations, carrying memories of a world that had been transformed during their lifetime. By the late Victorian period, widows had become familiar figures in nearly every community, yet their experiences varied dramatically depending on where they lived and the social circles they inhabited. A widow in a bustling city might encounter opportunities and challenges very different from those faced by a widow in a quiet rural village. Despite these differences, all shared a common reality. They lived in a society undergoing rapid change while carrying responsibilities that demanded strength, adaptability, and determination. In growing cities such as London, Manchester, Liverpool, New York, Boston, and Chicago, widows witnessed the transformation of urban life. Electric lighting began replacing gas lamps. Streetcars carried passengers across expanding neighborhoods. Department stores offered new shopping experiences. Modern communications connected people more quickly than ever before. For some widows, these developments created opportunities to find work, start businesses, or access services that had not existed a generation earlier. Yet city life also brought overcrowding, pollution, rising living costs, and intense competition for employment. Rural widows experienced change more gradually. Agricultural communities remained closely tied to traditions that had existed for generations. However, railroads and improved transportation slowly connected villages to larger markets. Farmers gained access to distant customers, and goods that once seemed exotic became more widely available. Rural widows often balanced traditional responsibilities with the demands of an increasingly interconnected world. They preserved customs and family practices while adapting to new economic realities. Immigration also reshaped many communities during the Victorian era. In both Britain and the United States, newcomers arrived, seeking better opportunities. Widows frequently lived alongside families from different cultural backgrounds, creating neighborhoods filled with diverse traditions, languages, and experiences. These interactions broadened perspectives and contributed to the evolving character of Victorian society. Some widows found friendship and support within these expanding communities, while others struggled to adjust to unfamiliar social changes. Newspapers became an important source of information and connection. Through daily publications, widows could follow national events, read advice columns, learn about local opportunities, and stay informed about developments far beyond their immediate surroundings. The growing availability of information helped create a greater sense of participation in public life. Women who might once have remained isolated within their homes became more aware of the wider world and their place within it. As the 19th century approached its conclusion, Victorian widows stood at the intersection of old traditions and modern possibilities. They had witnessed enormous changes in technology, transportation, education, and social attitudes. Their lives reflected the remarkable transformation of society itself. Whether living in crowded cities or quiet villages, these women adapted to a rapidly changing world while preserving the values of resilience, responsibility, and perseverance that had guided them throughout their journeys. As the Victorian era drew to a close, many widows found themselves reflecting on lives shaped by extraordinary change. They had entered adulthood in a world where travel was slow, communication was limited, and traditional customs governed nearly every aspect of society. Decades later, they lived in an age of railways, telephones, electric lights, mass newspapers, and expanding opportunities. Few groups witnessed the transformation of the 19th century as closely as Victorian widows. Their personal journeys often mirrored the dramatic evolution of the world around them. For many women, widowhood became a test of character that revealed strengths they never knew they possessed. Some had begun married life expecting to remain dependent on their husbands for financial and social guidance. Circumstances forced them to become decision makers, business managers, property owners, and heads of households. The responsibilities were often difficult, but they also provided opportunities for growth. Over time, countless widows discovered confidence through necessity and resilience through experience. Their children frequently became the greatest measure of their success. Sons and daughters who received education, found stable employment, built families, and contributed to society represented the fulfillment of years of sacrifice. Many widows took quiet pride in achievements that were not their own but had been made possible by their dedication. The prosperity of future generations often rested upon foundations built by mothers who had endured hardship with patience and determination. Communities also benefited from their contributions. Widows served as teachers, volunteers, business owners, caregivers, and trusted advisors. Their presence strengthened neighborhoods and helped preserve social stability during a period of rapid change. Because they had faced challenges personally, they often showed compassion toward others experiencing loss or difficulty. Their wisdom became an important resource for younger generations navigating an increasingly complex world. By 1901, when Queen Victoria's reign ended, society was entering a new century, filled with fresh possibilities and uncertainties. Many of the customs that had defined Victorian life would gradually fade, while new ideas about technology, politics, and social equality would continue to emerge. Yet the lessons embodied by Victorian widows remained relevant. Their stories demonstrated the importance of perseverance, adaptability, and personal responsibility in times of change. Looking back, it becomes clear that Victorian widows were far more than figures dressed in black mourning clothes. They were survivors, providers, leaders, and builders of families and communities. Their experiences reveal a side of history often overshadowed by famous rulers, industrialists, and inventors. Through quiet determination, they helped shape the society in which they lived and influenced the generations that followed. As the Victorian age passed into history, the legacy of its widows endured, carried forward through the lives they touched and the example they left behind. As we reach the end of our journey through the lives of Victorian widows, it becomes clear that their story is about far more than loss. It is a story of resilience, adaptation, and quiet determination. These women lived during one of the most transformative periods in modern history. They witnessed the rise of great cities, the expansion of railways, the spread of education, and the arrival of inventions that changed everyday life forever. Yet amid all this progress, their greatest achievements often took place far from public attention. Within homes, businesses, farms, schools, churches, and communities where their efforts shaped the lives of countless people, Victorian widows faced challenges that would have overwhelmed many others. They navigated financial uncertainty, social expectations, family responsibilities, and personal grief. Some managed thriving businesses. Others raised large families with limited resources. Many devoted themselves to charitable work, community service, and helping neighbors through difficult times. Their circumstances varied greatly, but they shared a remarkable ability to endure hardship while continuing to move forward. In doing so, they became an essential part of the Victorian world. Their influence extended far beyond their own lifetimes. The children they educated, the businesses they preserved, and the communities they strengthened helped build the foundations of the modern age. Through their actions, they challenged assumptions about women's abilities and demonstrated that leadership could take many forms. They rarely sought recognition, yet their contributions touched every level of society. Today, their stories offer a valuable reminder that history is not shaped only by monarchs, politicians, inventors, and military leaders. It is also shaped by ordinary people who meet extraordinary circumstances. With courage and perseverance, the Victorian widow stands as a symbol of that quiet strength. Behind every black dress was an individual story filled with hopes, sacrifices, decisions, and achievements. Together, those stories form a fascinating chapter in the history of the 19th century. And so, as the fire in our Victorian drawing room burns low and the evening comes to an end, we close this chapter on the remarkable women who helped define an era. Their world may have disappeared, but their legacy remains. Thank you for spending this time beside the fireplace, exploring the hidden lives of the Victorian age. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe and join us again for more fascinating journeys into Victorian history, where every crackling fire, every old photograph, and every forgotten diary has a story waiting to be told. Until next time, pull your chair a little closer to the fire, relax, and step once more into the world of the Victorians.